Good to be here. So I really appreciated those seeds for peace that you, is it Melissa? Tina,
Yeah.
thank you for that. That was wonderful. I want to start out with a land acknowledgement, though. I used to be an archaeologist, and I dug at the Point Pleasant pumping station. I don't know if any of you remember the fight of the Point Pleasant pumping. Some of you will. And I really got involved with, understanding the Lenape. And so I want to honor the land that we are on this morning. At the very least, honor the land, but the original inhabitants and caretakers of the land are still, those seeds of shame are still with us. And I think we just need to be allies as often as we possibly can for the Native American communities. So I've spent the last 35 years voluntarily walking into conflict and conflict zones. But my first half of my life was avoiding conflict at all costs. How many of you can relate to avoiding conflict at all costs? Many peacemakers do. And so how did I go from an avoider to feeling comfortable around conflict? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that spiritual journey that I went on. I think I came to peace building at a very, very, very early age. I was in the cancer ward for several surgeries as a child, as an infant, and up until I was 6 years old. And parents couldn't stay with their kids then. They had to leave them, and kids would pass away during the night. And I was one of those that would sit with whoever was in my room that might be passing over. So I feel like I came into this world with this seeing trauma happen, but also playing a role in some way of bringing a little tiny bit of inner peace to a situation that needed it. And so by the time I was 12 years old, I was like a total peacemaker. I knew peace was possible. And I used to lay in bed at night and just, a kid with 3 wishes. And my wish was always peace on the planet. I knew peace was possible. So I went about becoming a conflict transformer. I wanted to specialize in this. I didn't even realize this was something you could specialize in. And so, I'm a girl that was raised in a bar. My parents owned a bar, and, not exactly peacemaking material, but I was an observer of what was going on. And my parents were my first teachers. They would drive people home that had had too much to drink. Or if they couldn't find their house because they didn't always know where they lived, they would bring them home and they'd sleep it off on our sofa. So they never talked about it. It was just done. And helping neighbors, it was just done. We didn't talk about it. So I think that, when it came time to really understand what does it take to be a peace builder, I had some wonderful mentors. Some of those mentors were Dr. Louise Diamond from the United States Institute of Peace, Resmaa Menakem, who's author of My Grandmother's Hand, Dr. Sandra Bloom, who wrote Creating Sanctuary, an Evolution Towards a Sane Society. So I studied under that. And so I think it prepared me for what I was about to learn and understand. which is the role that trauma plays in conflict. Many years ago, probably 25 or so years ago, Edie, you can remind me how many years ago this was. The Ku Klux Klan decided to come to New Hope to protest against people who are LGBTQ. Does anybody remember that? And the Peace Center wanted to, find a way to respond to that. And so a lot of people talk about counter protesting, let's go there and turn our backs as they walk through town, or let's have a counter demonstration. Well, some of us decided to hold a unity event and bring together different faiths. And so this sort of, grabbed the attention of the news. And the next thing I know, I'm getting calls from like Dr. Phil's office. And I don't know if you remember Dr. Phil, or Phil Donahue, different TV shows, please come on air with the White Aryan Nation Ku Klux Klan. And the ADL said, do not give them a forum. Do not go on the same stage with them. However, they were going on the stage. They were having the Ku Klux Klan and White Aryan Nation speak. And I thought, can I serve as a role model in how to respond to hate? So I decided to go on TV. And I channeled Gandhi because I'm sitting across from a young man who I could not find the life behind his eyes. There was just a density there that I couldn't connect with. But the KKK leader looked like your next door neighbor. He looked like you could talk to him. So, but they were calling me names, and in channeling Gandhi, I just kept responding in as calm a way as possible. So when I got back to the Peace Center that day, I was surprised that the phone rang, and it was the leader of the Ku Klux Klan, who happened to live by the Peace Center, which I didn't know. And he said, I need to come over and talk to you, and hung up the phone. And I thought, do I call my kids and say goodbye? Do I try to call the police? What do I do? I didn't even have time to respond because he came up the steps, and I thought, I guess this is it. He's probably gonna do me in. And I said, what are you doing here? And he said, the way you responded to me, I felt like I could come and talk to you. In that moment, I realized that I opened a door for him. I wasn't thinking about opening the door for him when I was on TV. I was thinking of opening the door for people watching on TV. And so he sat down and he started talking and telling me about how his wife was dying. This man was in his late 30s. His wife was in the hospital dying. His 16-year-old daughter, who went to Neshaminy High School, hated what he did. And so he was in this very vulnerable moment. And so I let him talk, and I just listened. And at the end of that time, he decided he wanted to lead the Ku Klux Klan. He decided he wanted to, thank you. He decided he wanted to lead the Ku Klux Klan, and he wanted my help. So I helped him. And it was such a big lesson for me in the gift of listening to someone who I firmly disagreed with. His values did not match my values at all. And so he went into a witness protection program and was able to get out of the Ku Klux Klan. I found a cross on my property that I woke up to as a warning wasn't one of those big crosses. It was a small cross, a white cross, but it was my warning. And but you know, I realized that he was experiencing trauma. And when you're experiencing trauma, you can get very defensive about everything. And you want to find a place where you belong. And, you know, whether it's a gang for kids or whether it's the clan, you want to find a place where you belong and where you're accepted. And, you know, most of us, if we had a clan member that we knew of that was coming into our area, how many of us would go into our fear? So we carry trauma in ourselves. We carry trauma from our ancestors. Your great-great-great-great-grandmother, your great-great-great-great-grandfather, whatever they went through, we don't even know what they went through, but we carry that, along with what happens in our own lives right now. Whatever trauma might be going on in your own life, we carry. And so, is it any wonder that we are in conflict with one another a good portion of the time? And so, we've got the trauma of racism. We've got the trauma of sexism. We've got the trauma of our LGBTQ family. If we're an immigrant, if we're a religion that is shunned by many of the nation or disliked, you know, Jewish or Muslim, or if you're disabled, you're going through trauma. So how do we begin to heal that ancestral trauma that lives in us? Every single one of us has that issue. And what that means is, if we're in conflict with someone, or not, before we even get into conflict with someone, there's a good chance we're going to get into conflict with someone because we can't see your wounds. They're impossible to see. You know, if we could walk around with a crutch, somebody would be open the door for us. They would have a little bit of sympathy for us or empathy. But for the most part, we look like we've got our act together. Don't we? But inside, we don't, because we're trying to heal from that trauma. So I went to Rwanda probably 13 years ago. I've been there twice. This is a country that went through genocide in 1994. For those of you that, sometimes I run into people that call it a civil war. It was not a civil war, it was a genocide. Mm-hmm. And that genocide started because one small group was in power over another group. And that bred resentment because they didn't get the privileges of the group in power. And so on the radio, they would start calling the other group cockroaches and all kinds of names to dehumanize the other. Does that ring familiar to anybody here? What we hear about immigrants, for example. So the Hutus rose up against the Tutsis. And so I went there post-genocide to try and do some training, some healing and rebuilding, along with some other folks. And so the second time I went, I was asked to do a mediation training for a group of women. And of course, I didn't know the language, so I had to have an interpreter. And it was day one. We had 3 days together, all day long. And I had babies crawling around because, you know, when women come, they come with their children. And so I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this mediation when there's, children running around all over the place? But I just, followed my intuition and started to do the training. And one of the pieces of the training is learning active listening. So I broke them up into small groups of 4 or 5. And the lesson was, the activity was, share a conflict that's going on in your life right now. And the rest of you are going to be listening and repeat back what you think you heard, ask clarifying questions. And the next thing I know, everybody's crying. They're sobbing. And my interpreter said, oh my gosh, they've been re-traumatized. They're not going to come back tomorrow, Barbara. This was not a good thing to do. And of course, I lost sleep that night because I just re-traumatized 30 women. Not a good feeling. And but I laid in bed and I envisioned that these women were going to come back. And they did. They came back. And they weren't afraid to do another listening exercise, even though they sobbed. There was such a need to talk about their trauma. There was such a strong need for them to grieve. There are no counselors, very few counselors in Rwanda. You might be able to count on one hand. So how do you heal that kind of trauma? Well, these women taught me something, because what they did every time they then went into this trauma, one of them would get up and start singing and dancing, not in a joyful singing or dancing, but just like you could feel the heaviness that they would start out with. And they would all join in. And you had no choice but to join in, because your body just, needed to move with theirs. And then they could sit down and do the next activity. So when there's no one to deal with your trauma, how do you find ways to help yourself move, at least to raise that vibrational level? And so we do have that ability. We have that ability to deal with our trauma. And these women showed me that. And it's a lesson that, again, with all the training I had, it was like, oh, I'm learning something new about trauma that's different from what I had learned from my mentors. So we don't know how we're going to respond in our trauma until it hits us. All of a sudden, you're in conflict with someone. Oh my gosh, this doesn't feel good. This feels awful. What are some of the things that your body experiences when you are in conflict? Can anybody share with me? Tension. Upset stomach.
My jaw clenches.
Yes. Jaw clenching. How many of you get like a stiff neck? That's why the chakra work is so important. Stress, stress. But that, that your cortisol levels experience that stress, and it's hard to let go of. You have to find ways to let go of it, or to manage it if you can't let go of it. We've done studies in working with youth when they've been involved in a conflict. They're in their reptilian part of their brain for a minimum of 20 minutes to a few days and longer. I don't know if any of you are aware of the work of revenge. And in that 20 minutes, some real bad stuff can happen. How many of you have said things you wish you could have taken back? Pretty much all of us, right? So we have to do inner work. We have to do inner work and be more empathic to one another, more compassionate with one another. But we also have to grieve. We have to grieve when we have experienced conflict. We need to allow ourselves to have that grief. Like these women cried, they sobbed. That was their grief. And they had to do that before they could dance. And so grief work is really, really, really important. And I can't stress it enough how important it is to do that grief work for yourself. I was talking to Reverend Michael on my way up here, listening to the news about our entering into war with Iran. I was grieving as I was coming up here. I couldn't think about what I was going to say because I was in my grief. And I just kept holding a vision of the Iranian people, realizing that the patriarchy of our leaders is what the problem is and not them as human beings. And so honoring the feminine in all of us, honoring the fact that we need the balance of the feminine and masculine in all of us, so that we don't feel the need to build these weapons and go to war. If you build them, you want to use them. So we need to share our stories with each other, our vulnerabilities with each other. You know, my faith is Quakerism, and we honor the divine in every human being. We see the light in every human being. Sometimes that light is hidden, but it's there. But when it's hard to find, it's hard to like that person. And so I work very hard at, this is one example. I was driving with my grandson. He was in the back seat and he was 3 years old at the time. And there was a woman driving ahead of me who just couldn't figure out which lane she wanted to be in. It was annoying, you know. And I said, come on, darling, make up your mind. Which lane do you want to be in? And my grandson in the back said, people are stupid, Granny. And I said, no, people are not stupid. They're just in that moment confused about what they want to do. And we don't know what's happening for her in her car. We don't know if she's having a health issue, a sight issue. And that's how I try to raise my grandson, is think about what might be going on for that other person. He still ended it with, now people are stupid, Granny. So I learned from a woman named Karen Tibbles, who's a Quaker. She wrote a book, and she talks about the values. It's I think the name of the book is now it's left me. She wrote a book on, we share the same 5 values, whether we're conservative, independent, liberal, progressive. We all have the same five values, which I found fascinating when I read that. Mm-hmm. And the values are belonging, care versus harm, authority, which is like laws, right? Sacredness, which could be religion, spirituality, and fairness. She added one, which was reason. So she added a 6th one. Now, if we all share those same values, why is there so many problems? Well, her belief is that how much weight do you put on each one of those values? Right? So if you want to belong, but you're not worried about care versus harm, then that's a value that we might have in common, but our weight might be more on the care versus the harm. Somebody might have, well, we all want to have laws that we obey. But if those laws interfere again with the care versus harm, you might have more weight on justice for fairness, for example. So that's what we have to keep in mind, is how do we talk to one another with that common ground of belonging, because that really is the common ground. So, at a time when we're up against white supremacy and patriarchy, we can either stand in our fear or stand in our love. So I want to end with a couple of my, since I only have a couple minutes, a couple of my favorite quotes. The more we are awake, the more we contribute to the awakening of humanity. And I loved Pope Francis, who said, we need a revolution of kindness. And Jewel, the singer, said, in the end, only kindness matters. So I will end it there and take questions.